Welcome back. It has certainly been a bit, hasn't it? But hey, I have free time to blow, so let's pack the clowns, grease the monkeys, and get this three-ring circus on the road. What was I doing in the last video? I have no idea, but it looks like this one's going to involve designing a better solution for ore processing right off the bat, because the number of jams that this system experiences for no reason I can determine whatsoever is starting to get a bit ridiculous. Side note, looking back on this recording, I'm almost certain that the system was just full of stuff I hadn't set filters for, which is an entirely normal issue that comes around every time I start processing a new type of ore, but past Goose was a tad miffed, so we will forgive him for missing that. Oh, right. I remember what I was doing. Neutronium, americium, and tritanium, and all of the fun and games that come with it. Neutronium is a blast furnace recipe, which would be fine if it weren't for the fact that the pre-crafting process requires me to work with helium plasma, which melted the pipes on my eternally janked up mixer setup because it was feeling contrarian, and also because titanium piping doesn't hold up too well to gases heated to a balmy surface of the sun temperature. Oh, and because neutronium power is a ZPM crafting recipe on the EBF, this means once again my current energy solution is going to start struggling to keep up with high tier demands. There isn't really anywhere else to go from here with nuclear reactors either, so I'm going to have to suck it up and transition to something else. And that transition probably needs to happen before I start doing much of anything in UV, but we will attempt to put it off as long as possible. Before all that can happen, though, I have to finish the other thing I was working on in the last video, which was throwing out ZPM tier energy hatches to every machine on my network, like a Saudi Arabian oil baron throws out money to fund an indoor ski park in the middle of a desert. That is to say, excessively, though the jury is still out on whether the indoor ski park in the middle of the desert is wasting more power than my terrible cable management. Whatever. All my power is sustainably sourced from the power of war crimes. Pollution is the least of my concerns. Inevitably, this results in me finding and stomping out approximately 10 quadrihectillion supply line shortages and production inefficiencies. So many shortages and inefficiencies, in fact, that I sort of zoned out, got sequenced somehow, and then 2 hours later found myself crafting additional air intake hatches to supply more air to my vacuum freezer, to make more liquid air, to help resolve a nitrogen backlog that's preventing me from making more ZPM energy hatches, to upgrade my electrolyzers, to solve a shortage of phosphorus that is stalling out the creation of labotronic energy orb clusters, which I need to scan to unlock an even bigger recipe for even bigger labotronic energy storage solutions to make a giant battery in my base. Or I would be, if it weren't for the fact that an unrelated shortage in chemical reactor crafting capacity made me decide to try and make a second mega chemical reactor, which has ironically bogged down my chemical processing queue so badly that I won't be able to sneak anything else in for the next 20 minutes. Believe it or not, this is progress. Tech progression is also gated behind the creation of new alloys, particularly Peconium-64, which is gated behind my ability to produce ytterbium dust, which means I get to spend another 20 minutes reprogramming my ore processing systems with another 40 different random ores so that I can get the one that I want, but only after summoning yet another inordinately expensive meteor with an increasingly implausible catalyst. I'm not entirely sure what sort of juice mage happens to have ZPM tier circuit assemblers hanging around, other than me, apparently, but I'm scared to meet them. I also make 4 more mega chemical reactors because I want to clear out the space in my current large chemical reactor lines for future projects, which, if nothing else, serves as an excellent litmus test for my lack of patience for dealing with jank. Because ironing out the crafting conflicts between active and passive processing lines took the better part of a morning. I consider this well worth the cost of doing business, though, as my systems are finally working their way through a multi-tier backlog of crafting recipes. Enjoy it while it lasts. That backlog is going to start getting a whole lot more backlogged here in a moment. I also finally buck up and design a better system for crafting wires, by which I mean use the system that you're supposed to use instead of manually crafting the things using molecular assemblers. This worked fine when I only needed a stack of whatever I was making. It is less fine when I need 60 stacks, but wouldn't you know it, I kept doing it anyway. Digging through that mess and ripping all the stupid recipes out of the assembler interfaces was such a chore, it honestly felt like I was cleaning out one of those hoarder houses, only in this case it was a hoarder house of my own laziness and unwillingness to make transitions. One 5 hour long round of everything flavor upgrades later, and I am finally ready to do something about the energy problem. The too long didn't read summary on my current situation is that I can either suck it up, do it right, and solve the problem, or I can stick my head in the sand and pretend that the problem doesn't exist for a bit by buffering the crackers out of my power supply. Head meets sand in the form of a giant Lapatronic supercapacitor. To be fair, this is something I would want even with a good energy production solution, but whatever. The LSC isn't really anything special on its own, it's just a giant multi-block battery buffer that can accept Tech laser and ultra-high amp energy hatches to handle those inconvenient situations where it would be really nice to output 256 amps of power if you had that much, please. The interoperability with laser and conventional energy hatches is what has me interested though, because I like future-proofing my base designs whenever possible, and I'm going to need to start transitioning power transport options here pretty darn quick. Awesome, we have power storage. So let's talk power generation. Now, you have to believe me, I legitimately tried to make plasma, which is the way you're supposed to do power, work out. I unironically spent hours of my life reading this and running test after test after test in my creative world, trying to justify not just spamming out more nuclear reactors. And I don't know if I'm making a critical mistake somewhere here or non-bedrockium gated plasma is really just this bad, but the numbers just kept not working out for a run with my restrictions. One reactor, using 14 core cells at maximum efficiency, produces roughly 1.8 million EU per reactor pair. If I say balls to efficiency, and really when do I ever not, I can easily bump that up to 3.3 million per pair. Literally all I would need to do is upgrade the vacuum freezers to ZPM and the coolant cells to 1080K, and I was going to do the cells anyway because it makes the coolant swap timing less pants-wettingly terrifying. The production of core cells is basically a non-issue by now, so this is as close to free energy as you're going to get anymore. Compare that to fusion. I can't get bedrockium at scale yet because skill issues, so the intended plasma production line is out, though because reasons this doesn't end up mattering as much as you might think. If you ignore all material costs, the best reasonable setup I've found is to burn niobium plasma with a small icorium turbine in an extra large plasma turbine multi-block. That setup produced roughly 5 million EU per tick, required roughly 2 Tier 2 fusion reactors to sustain, and consumed an irrelevant amount of raw silicon and 2.5 ingots of cobalt a second. I can't afford to have my mining rig be monopolized by cobalt production 24/7, and void miners in the Twilight Forest are almost certainly too slow to keep up, so it would need to be produced by bees, and the energy cost of producing that much cobalt works out to roughly 2 million EU per tick. Yikes. This is the best setup, by the way. So, to summarize, I can either produce a net power output of 3 million EU per tick with 2 fusion reactor multi-blocks, 12 small icorium turbines, a extra large plasma turbine multi-block, 10 industrial apiaries with upgrades, plus all the wiring and automation logistics that would entail, or I can upgrade my already existing meme generator with like 30,000 tungsten steel, which is trivial to mass produce, and some other random junk that isn't really worth mentioning. Given how I worded that lovely dichotomy, I think we all know which way I'm leaning. Go away, plasma. See you again, potentially never. Or, in fact, in a few minutes because we need you to produce other stuff, but it's fine. We're not going to be doing plasma energy either way. After a great deal of retrofitting and the addition of a 4th reactor pair to my setup, my vac nuke design is once again ready to power me for a while, which may or may not make a difference. This setup reconfiguration was actually a really nice thing to do, completely independent of any energy gains I got out of it, since having an LSC vastly simplified the redstone controls and jank required to manage power throttling, and less jank makes the setup easier to maintain and scale. I also learned that despite my earlier worries, I am nowhere close to using all of my power production. because even in its current more efficient configuration, I can produce far in excess of what I consume and can almost double my production cap with no changes other than adding more cores. So we are really sitting pretty on power, at least pre-UV. Now that power is solved, let's start using some of it, shall we? Tritanium requires me to fuse molten duranium with molten titanium. Duranium requires me to fuse molten gallium with radon. Neither of these recipes is a problem materials-wise, and the ratios of their respective consumption and production rates line up by design, allowing me to produce 1 nugget of tritanium every 3.2 seconds with 2 dedicated Tier 2 fusion reactors and a bunch of power. It's not very fast, but it doesn't have to be yet. Americium is a single-shot recipe with molten lutetium and chrome, and likewise produces 1 nugget every 3.2 seconds, but I'm going to need spanking huge amounts of the stuff, so fusion will not remain my primary method of production for long if I have any say in the matter. I'd actually expected to have more fusion reactors out by now to produce americium, but that project was stalled due to a shortage of indium in the supply line. My material acquisition systems are tricked out to the nines by dint of living in the middle of a void, so this almost certainly was due to a production line problem. So I did some detective work and traced the problem back to this, the location formerly known as my indium phosphate centrifuge. It's a hole now, and I have no idea why. My only theory is that maybe a mob somehow teleported in from next door and damaged the plasma turbine that was powering it, but as industrial accidents go, losing a centrifuge and plasma turbine in ZPM barely registers as a stubbed toe, so I shove a new one in and get it cranking out again. That backlog will take a little bit to work through, so let's revisit an old friend. Yep, these of the oh god, not the variety. That said, now that each breeding cycle takes roughly half a second to complete, the whole breeding process is pretty simple. At the moment, I need to get 2 species, plutonium and niquata, to unlock the first round of gendustry machines, and this ends up not being terribly complicated. Really, the breeding part is easy. The annoying part is having to set up the specialized alvearies to satisfy their jubilance requirements. No jubilant plutonium bees, and no plutonium combs, sadly. And the combs are the whole point of this mess, unlike every other bee breeding project before. And, drumroll please, the first half of gendustry. The whole point of this mod is to remove all of the breeding parts from the process of breeding bees, which is fantastic. It, also is pretty boring and repetitive, and I don't have the devices that auto-mutates your bees for you just yet, so I get to do that part by hand still, but the main attraction for me is that it lets me sequence and digitize all of the traits of all of the bee species I've bred, and then recreate them in any combination on demand in my bees, which is really useful for doing things like editing out impractical to satisfy requirements, and not spamming your ME system with several 100,000 drones. A few hours of digitization, and unironically 3 meteors full of diamonds for labware later, and I can now also use the other half of the mod, which is the mutatron. It randomly mutates bees automatically using a green soup called mutagen, which is such a massive pain in the rear to produce the Gregtech way that I coughed up for a single block producer of the stuff, simply so I could introduce that particular can to my foot at high velocities. It's also a little bit hard on the bees, which would be a problem if I didn't have a hyacinth pooping out infinite ignoble princesses for me to recycle. But I do, so it isn't. The randomness is annoying, and I can't fix that without upgrading the machine with tech I can't make yet, but the Mutatron has a special property where it ignores biome and block requirements when mutating most species of bees, so it is still worth having. My new genetics tech nets me a handful of useful species. Phosphorus bees will hopefully forestall my eternal phosphorus shortage forever, which indirectly should also solve my indium problem. Indium bees exist, but they are one of the exceptions to mutation, and depending on how you mutate them, I would either need to take a trip to the bedrock dimension or Venus to breed them naturally, which is too much of a pain. Other useful pickups include Wither for easy nether stars, Thaumium Dust because I'm using a weirdly large amount of the stuff when I'm making fusion reactors, Lutetium because I will need it in bulk later, and Salt as a slightly less laggy alternative for chlorine production if that ever becomes a problem. You might expect by this point that I was finally able to make my fusion reactors and get americium going. You would be wrong. Instead, I got to make more mega chemical reactors because my recipe demands have grown to the point where I A, am once again so backlogged so badly on processing tasks that I can't cram through requested bills, and B, have so many things I need to craft that recipe conflicts are becoming a thing again. I'm up to 8 right now, but betting is open on how long that will last, because spamming them out wastes less time than trying to multiplex the circuit frequencies, and I am maybe 2 seconds from flipping my lid and hitting the problem with the hammer of infinite economy. It does finally solve the indium problem, for now, at least, and I am able at last to get my next 2 fusion reactor controllers crafting. This will take, at a minimum, 45 minutes thanks to the P-pick wafer requirements and the fact that I forgot to put more than one energy hatch on them, so in the meantime I start redesigning my factory floor a little bit. I'm still using 9-in-1 machines because I haven't and don't plan on updating to 2.7, but increasingly I'm butting heads with the cap on how many input hatches I have on them and how many recipes I need them to be able to handle. The solution, then, is make more of them, with more energy going into them, so I reuse the old LCR space to separate the 9-in-1s into very expensive 1-in-1s, with solid upgraded AE2 infrastructure instead of the weird pipe jank that I was using earlier. This bit of time wasting ends up being enough to get the fusion reactors crafted and online, and with a bit of extra wiring and automation, I am finally ready to enter the UV age. Technically. But first, let's do some math. I've been producing tritanium non-stop since I first turned the reactors on, and it is produced at a rate of 5 millibuckets a second. Dividing the number of millibuckets of tritanium I have, which is roughly 268,800, by 5, and dividing the result by 3,600 gives us 14.93. Which is how many hours of time I spent between turning the reactor on and now, which has been summarized down to roughly 5.5 minutes for your enjoyment. This seems like an excellent time to remind people I have mousepad merch deals with information in the description for no reason in particular. So cool, we have americium. We're ready to go to UV, right? Nope, not even close. The quest book helpfully informs us that we need 48 ingots of americium per UV motor. I can, and will obviously, be leaving the game running in the background to help grind up more when I'm not actively playing it, but that doesn't change the fact that I can currently produce one motor every 34 minutes. Bee-based americium production requires a mega apiary, no dimensions spawn its ore naturally for void mining, space mining requires a mountain of the stuff, and the only meteor that spawns with it requires roughly 600 ingots of the stuff to summon. So, time to craft some more fusion reactors, I guess. Yay! Literally the only human interaction needed for this, by the way, was summoning another tungsten meteor, adding back a missing circuit in my MCR line, and pressing the craft button. Gotta say, I'm really liking the cookie clicker reskin. It is so detailed that if I didn't know better, I would say I was actually playing modded Minecraft. Well, fine then. Let's get thumb twiddling, which in this game means upgrading your infrastructure for no reason, because you always need more infrastructure. Step 1, more ore, courtesy of a upgraded mining drill. Because more ore is more better, and item storage is basically free anyway, so who cares if you end up storing 30 million gypsum for no good reason whatsoever. The drill is actually so fast that it starts challenging the support capacity of my HV output bus / large platinum pipe combo, so to heck with it. It gets an entire AE2 subnet devoted to moving ore products a whole 40 blocks. Because why not? I don't trust anything else to scale well enough. But wait, there's more! More power equals more drill speed, and more drill speed equals even more ore. I'm amazed that the processing system can keep up, to be honest, but it works, so I don't care. And speaking of it works, so I don't care, now that I have a pretty much every bee in the game at my disposal, provided that I want to grind them out, that opens up a whole lot of extremely stupid and extremely simple ways of producing stuff. Louvre-tiered industrial apiaries consume rounding error levels of power, so for any bee-compatible material that I don't need ungodly amounts of, I can simply deploy industrial apiary spam and not think about it. And if I do need ungodly amounts of the stuff, I can simply deploy industrial apiary spam harder. Is this what you wanted, New Horizons? Because this sure seems like what you asked for. I can do this all day. Well, that's kind of a lie. I'm out of proven frames and can't be bothered to handcraft more because that involves doing magic for some reason, and magic is a big stinky that requires actual interaction. Instead, let's bring back a blast from way back in the past and get the villager dupers started up again. Eventually, some poor beekeeper is going to grow up, have dreams and aspirations of otherworldly wealth, and make the critical mistake of selling proven frames, and then boy howdy are we both going to be in business. Speaking of other blasts from the past, I want a drone station for remote maintenance and control of all of my many multi-block toys. For some reason, this machine requires solar panels, which requires, among other things, steel leaf, a material that can only be sourced from growing and breeding industrial craft crops that I don't have yet. Fun. Add that to the list of things to grind out over the next week. Just kidding, world accelerators work fine on industrial craft crops. This doesn't do diddly squat for improving the crossbreed chances because I still don't really have anything super similar to steel leaf that will do that for me, but it does at least let me grow my plants fast and crossbreed them at a rate of speed that doesn't cause boredom-induced brain hemorrhaging. It really says a lot that even at 32 times speed, crop breeding is still kind of boring, though. Here, Corium. Here, boy. Goose has a lovely little farm plot for you. You'll love it. It has water, it has fertilizer, it has extreme electrical stimulation. Good times. Meanwhile, my first round of another 2 fusion reactors completes in the background. You say spam? I say, yes sir. Spam? Yes sir. We are absolutely going to spam the living daylights out of the things because that is how this game works. 4 reactors is great, but I want more, so let's keep going. 6. How about 6? 6 extremely expensive radioactive donuts. This is nowhere near enough Americium production for my taste, but I can probably limp by on it for now, so I think that's where I will stop spamming in favor of doing literally anything else with my time and my production capacity. Excessive amounts of crop farming powered by world accelerators did eventually net me the Steely Frank seeds that I could spam breed into a full-on farm plot. Having Steel Leaf this late in the game is kind of annoying, but it does still open up 2 excellent utility options. The first is the Drone Center multi-block, which is the reason I made the Steel Leaf in the first place. It's basically an automated way to go tell maintenance problems to take a hike at the cost of turning into a budget Amazon ripoff. The too long didn't read is that you swap your maintenance hatches with drone downlink modules, and the multi will automatically maintain those modules if it is in range of them by slowly but randomly burning through a consumable item called drones. It also allows for remote monitoring and control of the machine's power state, which is amazing for recovering from, say, a power stall caused by a failure to do redstone wiring correctly on your vac nuke power throttling system. Not that I would have any experience with that or anything. Hold up. Trading time. Oh, wait, no, I already used that bit. Never mind, that's fine. 700 proven frames is probably crossing the line that separates enough and you are overcompensating. The second utility option Steel Leaf unlocks is the entire other half of Britannia that was gated behind the Elven Gateway. Yeah, that seems important and also a little bit late to the party. I can't quite put my finger on why, but I get the feeling that we may be a bit behind when it comes to unlocking that. Unfortunately, anything Britannia can offer me in terms of material processing is out-teched or under-tiered compared to my current game state, so I'm not super interested in a lot of the traditional production line stuff like orchids or luniums, but there is a flower that turns ignoble princesses into pristine ones, which I want to plant on a world accelerator very badly, and Britannia's endgame utility items are still stronger than anything I can make naturally somehow, so that's nice. Tragedy strikes before I can light the portal, though. Somehow, someway, I finally managed to run out of stuffed eggplants. My Gormarillas are starving, and I have no mana. Oh, the humanity. I probably just left the Garmy auto-feeder running at some point and forgot about it because I have not been using that much mana, but still, gotta feed the flowers to get the blue goo. I opt for the time-honored tradition of cannibalism with class and cram several hundred stacks of apple smoothie down their throats for a quick mana hit. It's not exactly fava beans and Chianti, but I accidentally left a knife in the tree farm and ended up with 500,000 apples somehow, and this seems like as good a use for them as any. This ends up being irrelevant since the trade recipes were changed in this pack and I didn't remember that at the time, so I guess I'm now set for mana diamonds for life, too. Yay. Of course, getting the endgame Britannia utility items involves a little bit more work than usual given the whole, oh wait, I'm playing New Horizons thing, and let me tell you that hit like a splash of cold water in the face so soon after finishing Blightfall. But as a New Horizons level of unnecessary recipe complexity goes, getting the Gaia pylon set up wasn't really all that bad. The real bosses here are the twin foes of inventory management and engaging in the compulsory butt-cladding required to not get DMCA'd out of existence by accidentally playing the boss music during this clip. Like a dingus, I decided to hit the trash mobs with my looting 70 Hikoku, and that caused some issues. Besides, mine's music is more thematically accurate. And yes, I am reusing that sound clip because I think it's hilarious and I'm willing to make you all suffer for my own personal enjoyment. If you ignore the potion effects, Gigolo Breadsticks 2, the Messiah of Telefrag, is largely identical to its little brother in every way that matters, so I wind up and start wailing on the thing. I've eclipsed vanilla scaling at a rate most easily expressed with factorials, so even in the unlikely event that Giggle Truck manages to simultaneously hit me, bypass my potion effect immunity and ranged projectile immunity, outdamage my passive health regeneration, and overpenetrate through my Awakened Icorium armor set with full protection 20, I have 140,000 ablative health reserves thanks to my 190-something levels of XP, and an effective last stand enchantment of 40. I'm pretty sure I could AFK mid-fight, take a nap, and wake up 7 hours later to a dead boss because it kept hitting me on my Thorn's enchanted armor, with no other problems than memory leaks crisping my CPU into charcoal. Gargle Blaster, of course, ignores all of this lovely in-universe tankiness and preparation in favor of just lagging out my game during the Monster Mash phase and forcing me to reload, though. So I guess you win this time, Gerbil Basher. Fourth wall attacks are kind of a cheap shot, but I prefer them that way here. One quick relog later, and I decide that the game-breaking bugginess may or may not have less to do with Turd Burglar here and far more to do with the several thousand ghasts that accumulated in the ghast farm that I forgot I was running, because getting rid of them made the next fight go a whole lot smoother. And it also increased Grape Gobbler's fire rate from once every whenever it felt like it to something approaching normal, so TPS? What TPS? We don't need no stinking TPS. Several more rounds of reversing Gargle Factory's kneecaps with my concentrated cheese stick and stealing its pocket lint net me all 6 fancy Britannia baubles of limited usability. The Aya Flugel got turbo nerfed, which is sad and extremely justified, but it is still a pretty decent get out of jank card, so I might keep it in my backpack just in case. The Fruit of Grisha costs mana now, but is still a better healing axe if, unlike me, you're at a game state where clicking on your AE2 iPad and going AFK isn't 90% of the game loop, so maybe someone has a use for it? Excalibur was reworked into the Key of the King's Law and is now the love child of a banana plantation in the US military defense budget. The only thing more noteworthy than its level of coolness is its level of uselessness as anything other than a trash compactor, though, so I will pass on that. The real get here is the rings, which are still pretty decent utility and mostly unnerfed, so I count this as a productive use of my time. Plus, I'm waiting on the EBFs. Really ought to push some buttons and make some more of those at some point. It's not like there's going to be anything else to do for a bit. Actually, no, I lied. There is, and it's crafting up and swapping out some of my dead core cells. Throttling helps with their power consumption a lot, but you can't throttle if you legitimately need the power, and I just finished a massive round of neutronium while prepping for a push into UV, so it does make sense that they aren't holding up too well. Would be a real shame if I couldn't just push a button and make more, eh? And speaking of pushing buttons and making more, and yes, I did just use that bit like 4 times in this video back to back because that's how this pack rolls. I've stalled enough that it's probably time to start making headway into UV now. First things first, dedicated UV component assembler. There will come a point where so many things require assemblers to produce that I will give up Paralyze Zaduki out of the things and manage the recipes using Tech databanks, but I can put that off for now, and it isn't like I don't need more assembly lines to parallelize production with anyway. I've had the scanning recipes for the components done for yonks, so there's really no reason to not get this built. I never bothered making the multi-block version of the assembly machine that can be overclocked, so my first craft at UV is, per usual, everything needed to construct a UV assembly machine, which is what gates access to UV energy hatches, and also I have to program the 300 or so patterns needed to supply the materials for them. To my great surprise, the energy hatch material costs at this tier aren't even all that unmanageable either. Like, sure, in a vacuum it requires a bunch of expensive goodies, but like, when did anything not in this pack? And also all the expensive goodies it requires are solved problems in the sense that I can just scale their production with more power. So if you ignore the apocalyptic firestorm of fury that recipe conflicts in my megachemical reactors have been kindling in the neighborhood of my left kidney, I feel weirdly optimistic about this next tier, conditional on solving the energy problem. And wow, is that an issue? I paid lip service to the idea of upgrading my energy grid, but the reality is that upgrade was mostly to power the transition from mid-game ZPM to late-game ZPM, and I've been politely ignoring the elephant in the room holding a neon green sign painted with the words, "You can't sustainably power a UV base yet, you moron." I have, plans for this? Around 70% of those plans by volume is written entirely with 4-letter words that spell out some extremely naughty things, and the other 30% reads "Ooga booga make bigger nuke go boom faster." But still, I do have plans. Unfortunately, I'm out of time for today, so implementing those plans will be a next episode thing. But before you go, logistics time. Nothing is still ongoing and will remain so, even if the terrible upload speed implies otherwise. This is not a cop-out, this is just how the math works. A conservative estimate put this episode at 95 hours of in-game playtime, not counting research testing and the process of making a video fit to show human beings. Long delays between episodes aren't me getting burned out, they are because I'm maintaining a full-time real-person job, a regular upload schedule, and also progressing through New Horizons. And of the 3, New Horizons is the most time-consuming and least sensitive to schedule conflicts. Have faith, nothing will come of it. Right, logistics time's over, self-promotion time start. Goose-themed mousepads are a thing, and the information is in the description if you're interested. I don't quite know how long they're going to be available, but you still have at least a couple weeks if you want one, so no rush if you're on the fence. Making YouTube a full-time occupation is something I am running the numbers on right now, which would mean a fairly substantial increase in the rate of content production. The crux of that decision rests on YouTube's ability to prove itself to be a stable financial prospect, though, so if you want to put a finger on that scale without directly giving me money, the usual simp for me on YouTube options, a la subscribing and incoherent screaming, I mean engagement, in the comments section, are shockingly effective. Most importantly, though, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope you'll be sticking around for the next one.